Fingers crossed Wi-Fi and everything will work well. But we have Cheryl Hung. Cheryl, how are you?
Hi, Simon. I'm doing great, thank you. What about you?
Whereabouts are you calling in from? Sorry, say that again. We're having a tiny bit of issue with the audio with Cheryl, so what we might do is cut the video on Cheryl's feed and see if that fixes. In the meantime, I'll give Cheryl's introduction so everyone knows who. Oh, there we go. Cheryl?
It is about 9 a.m. here in London.
Oh, in London. Excellent. Nice. I'm just outside, so joining the same time zone, which is nice.
Oh, that is nice.
So let me give you an intro, Cheryl. You're the Director of Ecosystem at the CNCF, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, and CNCF is one of our All the Talk sponsors as well. So we're very, very pleased to have you along to give us your session. A lot of experience working on Google Maps as a C++ engineer, which is actually one of the first languages I learned way back when, 20 odd years ago or so. Studied at the University of Cambridge at King's College and holds a master's in computer science. So we're really, really happy to have you here with us, Cheryl. Now, today, Cheryl's going to be talking to us a little bit about how cloud native is being adopted and what is coming next. So the CNCF hold surveys, and this is the 7th survey to be published. And so Cheryl is going to walk us through what's been happening and some of the trends over the last few years. So Cheryl, I'll pass over to you.
Great, thank you, Simon. So I will share my screen. My name is Ecosystem Cloud. So today I'm going to talk about how cloud native is being adopted and look at some of the trends over the last few years and what is happening next. So today I'm going to talk about 3 things in particular. I'm going to talk about the infrastructure dilemma, and then we're going to use some of the CNCF survey results from the end of 2019 to explore how organizations are adopting cloud native. And then we're going to do some live polling as well, because I'm interested to hear what you're doing and how you're using cloud native. So if you have a phone or a laptop handy, then I'll just give you a link about it. So a little bit about me. I'm an ex-Google software engineer, and I worked on Google Maps for about 5 years, mainly writing C++ and deploying it to Borg. So you could say that I've been thinking in containers for about a decade at this point. And after Google, I went to a startup to be a developer advocate and then a DevOps manager. And then now at the CNCF, my mission is to drive the adoption of cloud native and of open source. I also run the Cloud Native London meetup group. I talk to a lot of startups, a lot of companies, and I do a lot of talks. So Cloud Native Computing Foundation is the nonprofit that hosts about more than 40 open source projects at this point. But really, it was founded as a home for Kubernetes initially. So it's part of the Linux Foundation. And since 2015, we've really grown to encompass not just orchestration, but monitoring with Prometheus, logging, the container runtimes, different standards, and lots of other projects around cloud native. And we have, as a foundation, it's a nonprofit. And of course, this is all open source. So we're primarily funded and supported through membership, through companies who join the CNCF. So out of the more than 500 members, I spend most of my time with the end user community, which is about a quarter of all the companies. So these are companies that range from finance, retail, banking, startups, huge companies, a real mix. So that is enough about me. I told you about me. So now I'm interested in hearing about you. So if you have your phone or your laptop handy, please go to this URL. This is oicheryl.com/p. And then I'm going to ask 3 questions about you. And then later on, I'm going to ask 5 questions about how you're using cloud native. If you miss this link, this oicheryl.com/p, this is a redirect to a longer URL, so you can get that later. Okay, so we're going to begin now. Okay, so this poll is now live. So if you missed that URL before, you can use this longer one, pollev.com/Cheryl Hung 278. And I can see that someone has already voted for no. This is not their first time at a virtual conference. So I'm going to wait for about 20 seconds to see if anybody else wants to vote. Cool, we've got a yes. And if it's your first time, then welcome. Okay, feels like we're going to probably, oh, still a couple more votes coming in. So about 27% say it's their first time, 73% say no. Cool, cool, cool. So we're all experimenting with this new format of a virtual conference. So I'm glad to see that other people are having their first time. All right, next question. Where are you right now? So this is a image click. You can just tap where you are. This is awesome. We're seeing quite a few people from Europe, across Europe. Oh, New Zealand and Australia, a couple of folks down there. Awesome. Nice. I think somebody here is in the bottom left, landing in the ocean a couple of times, but you. And where are you? Are you?
So apologies, I think we're losing Cheryl. Oh, there we go. Cheryl's back. I was going to read the question out, but you're back. Might be better connection, Cheryl, if you drop the video on your on the feed.
Sure, so I can do
keep
that.
the screen share, but just drop the video. Let's see how that goes.
Cool. So what is your job title? So we've got architect, application developer, backend developer, engineering manager, SRE, DevOps, security, or something else. And if it's something else, if you can choose the closest one to what you're doing, then that would be great. Cool, so seems like backend developer and SREs are most well represented, application developer, actually about even now. Very cool, backend developer taking the lead. Awesome, it is very, very great, very nice to meet all of you, even if virtually from around the world. And for the moment, I'll pause on the questions, keep going with the slides, and then I'll come back to asking you about how you're running Kubernetes and cloud native. So what is the infrastructure dilemma? So infrastructure has to do three things, but really what it has to do is it has to remain both rock solid, both absolutely stable, and also handle massive, rapid, immediate change. So infrastructure needs to be highly available. It needs to be scalable so that if the demand goes up and down, then the infrastructure can support that elasticity. And it has to also scale on the supply side. So as features come in, you have to be able to do frequent deployments, and you need to be able to roll back if something's going wrong. So what does this actually look like? So obviously we're in the middle of a really interesting and unprecedented situation right now, which is the coronavirus. And Slack, everybody's working from home now who can do. So Slack has been one of the companies who's really seen the demand. So these stats are a couple of weeks old now. They're from the middle of March. But this graph in the top right-hand corner, the dotted blue line shows what they call the CWTs, Connected Workspace Teams, basically how many businesses are on Slack. And the dotted blue line shows what they expected to get. And the red line shows the massive jump when the coronavirus hit, and therefore how many new businesses signed up to join Slack in that short space of time. And on March 16th, this is a screenshot from their internal Slack teams. And you can see that every 15 minutes, they would record another 100,000 users joining every single 15 minutes from 7:15, 7:30, 7:45, 8 o'clock, 8:15. And just imagine that's another 100,000 people every single 15 minutes. So the infrastructure needs to be able to cope with this completely unexpected and unprecedented level of scale. So you've heard about this cloud native thing, right? And actually, this is something that cloud native can help with. So in the 2019 survey, we found that people valued the fact that you can get faster deployment times, you can improve scalability, and you can improve availability with cloud native. But interestingly, when Google originally came up with the idea of Borg, and Borg inspired Kubernetes, the reason was more for resource efficiency, the ability to pack applications closer and therefore make better use of server and utilize servers more usefully, more efficiently. Reduce cost. We found cost is actually the least important companies and people are getting from cloud native, which I think is native is really easy. It's huge, right? This is the, and it shows some of open source projects and some of the companies and products that are available out there. So where do you even get started? Well, I think a good place to get started is to look at what other people are doing. And as I said, to look at what you're doing. So get ready with your phones and laptops again, because I'm going to start asking a couple of questions. And then we're going to compare what the group of people who are listening right now are doing with what the CNCF survey said from 2019 and the last couple of years. So the first question is, how many containers do you run in production? So if you only run it in development and tests, then please choose the first option, not applicable. Otherwise, you can choose from less than 50, 50 to 249, 250 to 999, 1,000 to 4,999, or more than 5,000. Also, about 40% of people say they're not running containers in production. Most of the people who are seem to be running between 50 and 1,000, maybe a slightly more towards the higher side. Nobody's running more than 5,000, which I find interesting, or even more than 1,000. Cool. So the answers seem to have settled. So I'm going to now ask the same question to you on how many Kubernetes production clusters do you run? So if you don't run any Kubernetes production clusters at all, or if you run Kubernetes but not in production, then you can choose not applicable. Otherwise, you can choose from anywhere between 1 to more than 50. Okay, so 50% roughly you're not running Kubernetes production clusters. I'm guessing most people are running 2 to 5 because they might have a production cluster and a development cluster. Handful of people are running up to 20. I would be interested to hear how you're actually splitting these across clusters, whether it's across like availability zones or whether you do it across teams or something else. Cool, so about 40% are not running Kubernetes production clusters, and then 2 to 5 seems like the biggest grouping for the people who are listening right now. Okay, so let's compare that to what the survey results showed us. So what we've seen, so this 2019 survey was the 7th time that we've run this survey. So we can look back over the last few years from 2016 onwards. So the pink bar on the left is 2016 and the purple bar is last year. So what we've seen is that over time, the number of containers running production has increased, right? So there are a few respondents who are running less than 50 and more who are running, more than 250, more than 1,000 and more than 5,000. And the same is true for the number of production clusters of Kubernetes. So there are slightly fewer running 1 and slightly more running, I think 2 to 5, as what we saw just now in our survey is the most popular answer. And then going from sort of 11 onwards, there's a small number of companies who are running more than 50 clusters, but most are running in the 1 to 10 range. And for the companies who are using Kubernetes, the most popular option is still the public cloud, more than 60% running in public cloud. And right now, managed Kubernetes services are increasingly popular. So EKS, GKE, and AKS from the big 3 cloud providers. And then there's a handful of people who are running their own Kubernetes clusters, either on-prem or in the cloud, but not using a managed service, sort of deploying and operating Kubernetes themselves. So what about what developer tools are using? So developers are using Minikube to develop their applications locally, and then packaging it using Helm and using Helm to deploy it as well. So Helm has consistently stayed very popular, and the same is true of Minikube. So these numbers haven't changed too much from the last 2 years. On the operational side, there's different ways that you can separate Kubernetes applications. So you can place applications in their own namespaces. You can place them in labels, in separate clusters. This is a quite surprising result to me that more are using those applications. not cluster, or if there's different clusters are running different kinds of applications. But still we see that, and people can choose more than one, option here. So a very, very large number use namespaces to separate Kubernetes applications, and then a smaller number use clusters and labels. And we said before that one of the dilemmas of infrastructure is how do you scale applications to match the demands of something like the coronavirus. So auto-scaling stateless applications is relatively trivial now. About 70% of companies auto-scale their workloads, either horizontally or vertically. Stateful applications are significantly less, databases even less than that. And on the serverless side, we kind of see some steady growth in interest. So there were several options here. Hosted means something like AWS Lambda or Google Cloud Functions, or one of the ones provided by a cloud provider. Installable software is more like you're running your own clusters, could be cloud, could be on-prem, and you're running Kubernetes on them, and then you run a layer on top of that for your serverless functions. So AWS, out of the people who responded that they preferred to use a hosted platform, AWS Lambda was the most popular. And out of the people who said that they installed and ran a framework themselves, Knative was the most popular. And there's a slight drop in the number of people who said that they were planning to use it in 2018, and then those who are saying that now, and increase in the ones who are using it. So that means that serverless is maturing because there are previously people were investigating, now they're actually using something. And the overall results of this is more automation, more frequent releases. So the number of people doing manual releases has dropped steadily. And the number of automated is roughly the same, but this is quite interesting. So companies are doing more hybrid, sort of automating parts of what they can and then using their manual process for everything else. So this is a trend that I expect to see more and more over time, that fewer releases will be done manually and more will be automated. And again, this comes back to that infrastructure dilemma of how do you do rapid deployment at the same time as keeping everything stable. And we're really pleased to see that the number of companies doing daily and weekly releases is so 20%. So this is because instead of doing monthly, quarterly, or yearly, these release cycles are smaller, shorter, and faster. So that means they're less risky because people can deploy smaller units of work and be able to roll back more easily as well. But of course, not everything is perfect. So I'm going to hand back to you and ask you, what are some of the challenges that you've seen if you're running containers or if you're running cloud native, if you're looking at it, what are the challenges? So this one is like a Reddit poll. So you can add in some responses and then you can upvote and downvote other people's responses. So I'm going to give a few seconds for you to think about it. I don't have any responses yet, but I find it, okay, we got one. So lack of infrastructure and DevOps mostly. Proper full GitOps process. GitOps is really interesting to me. I think GitOps can definitely, I think it's the way to go, but I think it's easier to say than it is to do. There are a lot of good resources out there in terms of GitOps, but actually applying it is a big change, a big cultural change as well. Learning curve is always a problem, always a problem. I think this space moves so fast that even trying to stay on top of what's happening is kind of a full-time job, never mind trying to adopt and actually build things. So adoption across the team and dev prod parity. Yep, again, this comes down to the cultural changes across the team, right? It's quite easy now to add to spin up a cluster. Running a cluster, running a container is not a big deal. Getting lots of teams and lots of people to adopt that, especially where you have a large organization and a lot of legacy, that can be really hard. Lack of sufficient knowledge. Yeah, I think this is kind of similar, same as the learning curve. Managing databases. I come from a storage background, so I absolutely agree that running stateful applications is really, really hard. So yeah, learning curve, education, adoption. Yeah, I agree with all of these. Okay. So I think there's still a few more votes coming in, so I'm going to give you another 10 seconds to keep voting. Cool. Seems like the numbers have settled. Okay. We're going to keep going. So this is actually quite similar to what we've seen from the CNCF survey as well. So the cultural changes across the development team, pretty much everybody is facing this same right now. Security and the complexity of the overall solution were also very common responses. Lack of training, again, that comes to the educational opportunities and the adoption across the team. We found a drop from 2018 in this one, the lack of training, because there are more options now out there now for training. For example, the Certified Kubernetes Administrator exam, which the Linux Foundation runs, or the curriculum is open source. So there's a lot of good content out there already. On the technical side, compared to 2018, we actually saw these numbers drop a little bit. So particularly monitoring and networking used to be much greater problems. It used to be more than 50% of people ran into these problems, and over time, these are now dropping. And in terms of service mesh and storage, both of these have pink. Pink means evaluating, purple means using it in production. So you can see that although there is a lot of interest, the actual number of people using this in production is relatively small, I would say. Okay, so last two questions for you, because these are always hot topics. So if you're using a service mesh, which ones are you using? You have the option of Envoy, Istio, Linkerd, Conduit. Anything else? Not yet, but we're considering maybe the next 6 months or a year or whatever. Or we have no plans at the moment to use a service mesh. So Istio is looking like the most popular answer from those who are using it. But same as what we just saw in that survey. So a large percentage of people are currently evaluating service meshes, but have not yet actually deployed those into production. And last question for you. So do you run stateful applications within Kubernetes? In other words, are you using some kind of storage, or are you just focusing on the stateless applications? I should have, yeah. So you can say you don't run Kubernetes, or you're only running Kubernetes in dev and test. So I'm interested in the stateless or stateful applications here. So I kind of like this. As I said, storage is where I come from, my background. So I'm actually quite pleased to see that a third of people are running stateful applications within Kubernetes. I think this is a good sign, and this is something that was much harder a few years ago compared to today. But there's still space to grow and for this to mature. And there's the last of the questions for you. So we're going to wrap up, but I want to thank you for joining this and contributing your answers and letting everybody else know a little bit about you as well.
That's awesome. Thank you very, very much, Cheryl.
One more slide, one more slide for you. So just to come back to originally that Slack, how Slack dealt with the coronavirus situation, there's a full case study written about this, which you should read. And it's incredibly interesting, goes into a lot more detail about how Slack is using, in particular, storage, Vitess, this storage product. But this is the CEO of Slack, and he gave a shout out to the infrastructure engineers for keeping Slack running through these crazy times. And Slack also contribute back to the community and contribute back to open source. So they're a good model to follow and to read. I've got a couple of links for you. You can check out this later on my blog. It's oisheryl.com if you want to read about this or the CNCF survey or any of the other case studies. And now I'm going to say thank you very much and I really appreciate your time.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Cheryl. And also thanks to the CNCF for supporting all the talks. And now we're